Well, thanks so much for joining us, everybody. I'm really excited about this presentation today. Haley and Sydney did speak with a lot of us at Confluence this year, and now they're kind of going to bring us back and talk through a lot of their really cool work. And I learned a lot from them at Confluence, so I'm excited to learn even more. So to get us started, if you've been to our All Partners webinars before, we do like to start with a little what I call a chatterfall, but it's just kind of like a way to do quick introductions and get a sense for who's with us today. We usually save those so that if there's anyone you want to follow up with, you might be able to look back through the list and see who was here. That'll be shared with the folks who register. So in terms of what you want to add to your own chatterfall, just think about that. So we'll do that in a second. We also have just some community guidelines we like to remind folks of when we get started. Please keep yourselves muted unless we're in a breakout groups or if Haley and Sydney open up for questions. If you want to check your Zoom name just to make sure it's correct. I know if you're anything like me, you're on the work Zoom and sometimes it's just your organization name. But it would be nice for folks to know who you are if you can change that. If you do have like a pressing question and you're feeling a little uncertain of, how to get your voice in the room, please feel free to raise your hand. Myself and Nicole will help keep an eye on that. So if you're raising your hands, we can help Sydney and Haley know. And then obviously we have mutual respect and curiosity for everyone here. So we want to keep that in mind. Usually not any kind of issue, but we like to create that space. So let's get started with the chatterfall. And then just as like a fun icebreaker question, what is one word you would use to describe a good collaborator? All right, and now if everyone is ready, let's click send together in 3, 2, 1. Awesome. I'll give everyone a chance just to kind of glance through. I'm really curious to see what folks' words are, and I'm really loving what I'm seeing. Generous, empathetic, listening, reciprocal, all really great responses. So definitely take a chance to glance through that. So I should back up really quickly. I didn't introduce myself. My name is Ariana Rashke. I'm the director of the Western Collaborative Conservation Network. I'm also the Associate Director of Practice with the Center for Collaborative Conservation. And we host these All Partners webinars about 4 times a year. If you are new to WCCN, and I see a lot of folks that have been in our sphere for a while, we're even at Confluence. But for anyone who's new, I just like to paint a little bit of picture of what WCCN is. It's a support network for folks that are working in collaborative conservation, and we focus on community building and peer-to-peer learning opportunities like this one. So our big event that we do is Confluence, which is a conference that we put on every other year, bring folks together from across the Western United States. That's where I had the chance to meet Haley and Sydney earlier this year and get to learn a bit about their work, along with a bunch of you on this list as well. But this network is open door. So we have working groups, we have these webinars, and we invite anyone to get involved when they want that support and community building. We're here for it. So today, pretty simple agenda on my end. Sydney and Haley are gonna give some more detail of what they're planning, but most of our time today is gonna be focused on their partner spotlight and just giving them the chance to not only teach us some stuff, but I know they have some breakout groups planned as well. And so I will hand it off to them. They will introduce themselves and dive right in. Thank you guys for coming to share with us today.
Yeah, thank you, Ariana, and thanks everybody. This is really exciting to be here. So thanks again for the invitation. And we're going to be talking about the Upper Willamette Stewardship Network's commitment and framework for tribal partnerships and decolonization. And I'll just do a quick intro. My name is Haley K. Scott. I'm the tribal liaison with the network. I'm a member of the Confederated Tribes of Siletz Indians and a descendant of the Klamath Tribe, Yurok Tribe, and Skokomish Chippewa.
Thanks, Haley. Yeah, so my name is Sydney Nyland, and I am the director here at the Upper Willamette Stewardship Network, and just really excited to be here with you all today. Okay, so our plan for the day is we are going to start with another participatory activity, a little word cloud. Then we're going to give just like a 15-minute overview, an introduction to our framework for tribal partnerships and decolonization. We'll leave time for questions after that and clarifications before we kind of put you guys in some breakout rooms to think about the framework and how that might apply in your work. And then we'll have some time at the end to report back and just do a little closeout. Okay, so here's the word cloud exercise. I'm gonna share something different. I believe in the chat there should be a link, and then you can also scan this thing if you want to. Oh wait, hold on. Let me go back to instructions. That's what we need. Okay, so you can either go to this link or you can scan that with your phone and go on your phone. And so the idea behind this, you want to talk about that, Haley? Like make sure things are going okay?
Yeah, so we just wanted to start off our presentation just to get I guess, a good idea of where everybody's mind headspace is in doing this type of work. And so our question that we're hoping folks can think about is, what words describe or represent your experiences with tribal partnerships and with building tribal partnerships? And so we're hoping that you can keep your response at least to one word, so it doesn't get too full in there. But if you want to submit multiple words, that should be possible. So it looks like folks are starting to put stuff in there, and so we'll take a few minutes to do this.
It's so fun to watch it move around. All right, so it looks like people are pretty much done. So you got a lot of good words going on up there.
I guess we can just read off a few of these big ones. Looks like multiple folks have listed trust, relationships, listening, having patience, building, and some of the other words just kind of popping out is overdue, time consuming, intimidating, collaboration, introspection. So it seems like a lot of stuff is going on here, but pretty interrelated.
Thanks. So it's really helpful to see kind of how people's experiences have been today. And we know one word can never encompass it all. I'm gonna go back to our presentation now. Okay, so oh, where did that one go? There it is. Sorry. Okay. Introduction. Let's get started.
Just to say a little bit more about who we are, what the Upper Willamette Stewardship Network does. So the network, we're a collaboration of several land stewardship organizations, active partners, and supporting agencies in Kalapuya Lihi. Those are the traditional homelands of the Kalapuya people. And our commitment to care for the land and water requires engaging respectfully and reciprocally with Native people. So the network, we do work together to share information, resources, and achieve advancements in conservation across our region. So the Upper Willamette Basin here in Oregon, our network members also work to improve and expand programming, increase our collective cost effectiveness, and eliminate the duplication of efforts, and just to help us achieve longer term organizational stability. And so this is all in service to our shared commitment to the region's land and water resources in its communities. And again, I'll just say a little bit more about our members. So those members include our local watershed councils here in the Upper Willamette Basin, the local land trust, and our local soil water conservation district.
All right, so here is our framework. And so we're gonna the whole presentation about the framework, so I'm not gonna go into too much detail here, but what I really wanted to point out is that we've developed this framework based on these principles of applied decolonization that you can see on the side there. And we work really closely with our lead Native advisor, Dr. Dina Dart of Live Oak Consulting. And she developed these principles of applied decolonization, and our work with her has really been figuring out how to bring those principles to life in this like network collaborative reality that we live in. And it's been just a really interesting and meaningful experience for us all. So the first stage of the principles of applied decolonization is to disrupt Western thinking and provide an alternative. So that's like a lot of learning and unlearning about sort of the Western culture and what it what it does in our work lives and in our environment. Then the second stage is integrating Indigenous values and goals, right? And we really focused on um, elevating Indigenous values and goals and also creating space for Native people to be doing that work um, and creating structure so that they're able to participate and lead as appropriate. And then that third stage is rooting new concepts and policies, right? And that came from some lived experience of our Native partners, right, who have spent a lot of time and effort teaching white-led organizations and helping us to understand. And then whenever maybe staff change happens or leadership change, then that investment, goes by the wayside. And so really they've encouraged us to create some policy around this so that it's more foundational to our organizations and not something that comes and goes, right? Yeah. We have our Tribal Partnerships in Decolonization Forum, which we call the TPAD, which we know is a very weird acronym, but we're used to it now, so we're going with it. And so the TPAD really came together from staff from across different network organizations, really wanting to provide that clear space for coordinating our tribal outreach and for learning together. And I think what's cool about this is that it's always been based on and guided by feedback from tribal partners. When I started, our tribal partners were just like, man, you guys send us so many letters about your projects. Like, we don't have time to read all those letters. You guys are driving us crazy. Can you find a different way? And so we really took that to heart and tried to think, okay, how can we really um, coordinate engagement so it's not just a bunch of letters, and how can we prioritize engagement that's meaningful and that responds to tribal priorities and not just our own planning in our own projects, right? And I think the third really important element there is that we really wanted staff to have skills to be good partners. So I know a lot of you put up things like listening. Those skills, though, that ability to communicate interculturally and show up in a good way, I think this has been really important for being able to do this work. And I'll bring up this slide. So I won't go into too much detail, but the way that we started was we wrote a grant for a year-long intensive training series that really focused on that learning and unlearning and building relationships together with our Native partners on the landscape. If you want more information about this, please feel free to ask us for it. We got a really cool write-up of the whole training module series from our partners who helped us put it on. And yeah, it was just a really amazing experience. It really helped to get us off on the right foot. So it was a humongous investment in time. It's not something that can be taken lightly. Yeah.
All right. Thanks, Sydney. And I'm going to take this slide. So why is this all important? So it's allowing the network to identify effective framework and methods for engaging with tribes and Native communities here in the Upper Willamette Basin. So just a little bit more about why it's important to start with this and some things that we have pulled out and identified as a group and network is that committing to elevating traditional ecological knowledge in an appropriate way, and that is also non-extractive. Identifying opportunities for collaboration with tribal staff and leadership, and then consolidating, like Sydney mentioned, consolidating the number of requests for partnership and co-management, co-stewardship, and just making sure that we're being considerate of time and capacity in these requests, and yeah, just being a good partner in this disrupting space.
Okay, so we wanted to really bring across some case studies for you all today. And since we hoping there's some other network nerds like us in the audience, we decided to focus on the structures for collaboration. So how we really organized ourselves to make this work happen in a collaborative way. So the first case study is our Tribal Partnerships and Decolonization Forum. So we already mentioned that a little bit. So it's a collaborative group, what we call project teams in our network, and it brings together staff representatives from across each network organization. We do have one board member on there, a couple, and then we also invite all of our Native staff and our Indigenous partners to participate on the team. We meet every month, and we also put on annual trainings. And we really just try to provide leadership and coordinate our work in the area of tribal partnership building and decolonization. So that's both that internal work of decolonization and then the external partnership building element. And we do it because we want to make sure that we stay committed to the work and that we have that central location for coordination. So we're not all kind of doing separate things and asking tribes the same thing in a different way all the time, and really just having that one place to focus on this. And so how? So this is kind of the nitty-gritty of the collaborative structure, right? So we have a charter and it outlines specific roles within the forum. Those roles last for 1 year, and we have our January meeting each year, which we spend reviewing those roles and then also creating a work plan. We like to provide funding for staff to participate, as well as for those materials and supplies, and of course snacks, because we want people to want to come and not have barriers of, not being able to afford the time to come. So yeah, so those are the ways that we kind of like attend to the nuts and bolts of making that collaborative structure work.
So we've talked about disrupting, we've talked about how we've started to think about this work in a meaningful way. So bringing us to our second step of that decolonization framework of integrating everything. So the model that we're working on is further framed by 3 different types of engagement that you see on the screen. And we've broken it up for a few different reasons. So starting with number 1, and engaging with tribal governments. So we're doing this through a more formal way because tribes, they do have a unique relationship with the United States federal and state governments and political status. So we want to be good partners and we want to be respectful in engaging tribal staff and, when appropriate, tribal leadership. So this looks like, or has looked like, setting up regular check-ins with tribal staff in the local area, meeting with tribal government leadership when we're invited, and again, when it's appropriate, to discuss our priorities and just different opportunities for, I guess, longer term engagement and just setting goals. So number 2 is engaging with local Native communities, and we'll talk a little bit more about another case study related to that. But one thing that we have done as a network is invited Native community members, local Indigenous peoples here in the Upper Willamette Basin to serve as Native Advisory Council members for the network. We did this because there may be tribal members or there may be tribal members or Indigenous peoples who are not authorized to speak on behalf of their tribe, or they may not be enrolled in a federally recognized tribe, but still have deep connections and ties to this landscape. And then finally, number 3 that you see here on the screen is engaging with Native and Indigenous academics and researchers to help inform our strategic action planning as a network and help inform and structure our tribal engagement protocols when we get to that point. And just recently helping with network training. So we host local researchers to come and talk about their work. We make sure to pay them for their time because that is definitely important. And just bringing staff together in a shared space to continue hearing from folks and continued our shared learning and growth. So that is our engagement structure that is probably going to change, and as we learn together. Okay, so like I mentioned, our second collaborative case study is focused on our Native Advisory Council. So working in partnership and together with our Tribal Partnerships and Decolonization Forum. So who is making up the NAC? Local Native and Indigenous community members here in the Upper Willamette Valley and surrounding region. Why are we doing it this way? To ensure that we engage with Native and Indigenous peoples who, again, may not be enrolled in a local tribe or unauthorized to speak on behalf of their tribe. How do we do this with them? We meet on a semi-quarterly basis, or at least we try to, but people are busy, so we try to respect their time and do what we can. And we also provide them a yearly stipend to, again, make sure that we are being good partners and respecting their time and participation, because it is important. And I will say, just in my own past experiences and hearing from others who are doing this work, that hasn't happened a lot of the time. We're invited into these spaces, but we are not paid for it. And so that is not reciprocal. So that is part of why we do this. And what do we do with the NAC? We try to discuss and identify broader strategies for meaningful engagement and planning for the near and long term. So just making sure we're starting off with a good foundation and being reciprocal with our actions.
Yeah, thanks, Haley. I guess I want to say one thing. Our last Native Advisory Council meeting, our main question was like, what are white-led conservation organizations getting wrong? Like, what are we doing wrong? And it was just like really cool to hear kind of their feedback and what they wanted us to learn. So yeah, it's a really nice space to just get into it. So one of the questions that we always get is, how do you pay for all this stuff? And it has been a very elaborate scheme to get it all paid for. One of the things that our partner said, I think I mentioned, is that they didn't want to participate if it was just going to be a one-time thing, but they wanted it to be a sustained commitment. And so we really need to have sustained funding for those mechanisms of integration to really stay in place. So this goes into every single grant. We keep line items for BIPOC honoraria and our stipends for our Native Advisory Council. That way we make sure that whatever comes up, we have funding, you know, and sometimes we're in a place like, oh no, we didn't spend all of our BIPOC honoraria. What are we going to do? Which are actually happening this week. But it's nice to have it, because if you need something, then you're not scrambling and you know that you can engage people in a fair and equitable way, right? We also put together a really cool collaborative funding model for funding Haley's position as our shared tribal liaison. So Haley's a shared staff member with 7 organizations housed at one of our watershed councils. And each of those organizations contributes to Haley's position in a different way, whether that's through including in project-based grant writing, taking it from their like general fund. So everybody contributes a little bit to make sure that that position is covered. It's been a really essential element of our large-scale funding proposals. So as all of you know, there's been a lot of federal funding coming down, and we've actually had pretty amazing success with integrating funding for our TPAD forum, for Haley's position, for our honoraria to support our consultants and our partners in these large-scale funding proposals, even though they're focused on restoration outcomes, but we've really been able to fund a lot of this tribal partnership and decolonization work through those. I think the last element I want to talk about here, just part of our commitments, right, is in those collaborative funding proposals, because as a network, we're already writing funding that covers 7 or more organizations. So we've really worked to integrate subawards and funding mechanisms that will support our native partners. And so that's been really cool to see. We've included subawards for our local tribal governments, for our Indigenous-led partner initiatives, and that's been really cool and successful.
Okay, so we've talked about disrupting, we've talked about integrating, and so finally getting to the third step of that decolonization framework is actually rooting these new concepts in policy. In doing so, it ensures that we have a consistent understanding of why and how to engage Native people, and to also help support a more systemic and rippling impact in building our collective resilience in the face of future changes and disruptions. So also making sure we hold each other accountable and play to our respective strengths and role model what decolonization can look like. Because I don't think there's any one way that decolonization can look like. I think it's going to be different in different contexts, different communities. And so we have taken the first step in doing that and laying our foundation for our commitment to decolonization by developing a set of commitments that we are hoping the network, or that we are hoping will help the network stay accountable. We have developed that partnership with our TPAD forum, our Native Advisory Council, have engaged with tribal staff in the area just to make sure we're doing a good job. And the next step in doing that is making sure we actually operationalize those commitments, because we can say, yes, we commit to doing this, but how are we going to do this? How are we going to make sure that, again, we're holding ourselves accountable and not just checking the box? And so one way we're starting again is to roll out those commitments with each, throughout the network with each team. And yeah, again, just making sure that we're learning and growing and yeah, actually making a commitment. So.
All right, so that is the end of our formal presentation. So we wanted to open up some time for questions or clarification if there's parts of our framework that you'd like more information on before we go into breakout groups.
Oh, we've got a hand up. Kira, do you want to ask your question?
Yeah, thanks. Thank you all for this presentation. I was at your session at Confluence, and it was great to hear from you all again and some more details. I have a question about how you balance feedback from your Native advisory group with your liaising with tribal governments when maybe there are dissenting opinions or perspectives, and how you figure out, how to incorporate that feedback and move forward if that comes up.
Yeah, I think that's a question we're still asking ourselves and trying to figure out. And something that we've just tried to do is stay flexible and again, being respectful. And I think just being open and transparent, saying we've had a lot of contradictory statements or input and feedback. So that's kind of led us to a space of compromise, which I think is okay. Because again, just saying that this work has to be it's ongoing and it's going to change depending on the context and the people who are part of it. And so I'll just say that's something that I try to keep in my mind as I do this. I don't know, Sydney, if you want to add on to that.
Yeah, I think it is a little complicated. Well, we try to look for common things kind of coming from both of those areas, right? And so one of those is really just like a strong desire to, I guess was put recently as restoring traditional ecological knowledge and really doing that through getting Native people and Native communities back out on the land. And both our tribal government staff and our Native Advisory Council and other partners can get behind that. You know, everybody wants to see that happening and so we've kind of focused a lot of our initial work on goals that are mutually agreeable, right? I'm sure that we'll have a lot more issues um, coming up in the future. But yeah, for now, it's okay. Yeah. Okay. Example of what is in your commitments.
Yeah, so we didn't include it in the slides just because we have 10 commitments that again took a really long time to put together. And maybe I'll just read off a few. One is amplifying Native voices, elevating those stories, and serving as a conduit for tribal priorities, even when they're not among the network stated goals and priorities. So I think that kind of speaks to a question that we got. Again, what Sydney mentioned, facilitating sustained funding support for Indigenous-led work. Just creating a platform for ongoing learning and growing, like I've been kind of talking about, engaging in those difficult conversations, creating these tribal engagement protocols, and just helping to make sure staff are moving forward together on this work, making sure that we're not increasing the burden placed on tribes and Indigenous peoples. So thinking about sending all those letters and requests for engagement that I know they consistently get, not only from us, but federal state partners and many others. And I think something the network kind of has a unique, I don't know, leverage is trying to facilitate or create pathways between Native people and those that we serve here in the Upper Willamette Basin, so including private landowners. And then finally is land back and facilitating access and ownership of land for Native people. So that's kind of just a quick rundown of our 10 commitments that we put together.
I think I saw in the word cloud a few folks feeling like beginners in this space. I'm curious, like, if you're starting from scratch, what would be like your 1 to 2 biggest tips for folks of like trying to make these connections and build some of the, you know, like relational infrastructure that you would need to do something like this?
I have some, and I'm sure we'll both give some. So I think one thing that is a good place to start is reading and learning. You know, if you can find or if you want to provide decolonization training in your organization or for yourself, um, it is available and we can help you connect to it if you want. I think that learning and understanding how we come off when we show up in these conservation spaces is really important to building that humility and that ability to engage with tribes and Native people in a, I guess I'll just say a less arrogant way. I think that's really important first step. And then getting that training to your colleagues and your leadership and your partners is, I think, really important.
Yeah, I want to say one thing that I've been consistently hearing from tribal staff and Native communities is just doing your homework before conducting engagement as one place to start. And so trying to gain a better understanding of the place that you're in, the people who were there and continue to be there, what tribal sovereignty and governance means. And so just, yeah, just doing the homework.
Yeah, and then showing up like at Native events. So like for example, a really easy thing that I do every month is I keep 2 hours in my calendar. They were yesterday to review what's going on, what's coming out in the tribal newspaper, what are our local tribes up to, making sure that I know so I can put those events on our calendars and when we can show up to those events and meet people and understand what they care about and what they're doing, you know? So those are some, I know Haley goes to a lot of events, and I think that building community in that way is extremely important.
Thank you guys. Super helpful.
My apologies, I was late if you've already covered this, but I'm really curious about what kind of common mistakes or sticking points have you encountered that maybe would be lessons learned for us to be thinking about?
I can start. I made a lot of mistakes. I guess one example I can share, which is related to something we talked about earlier, was that sort of oh, okay, so here's the story. So when we were negotiating the development of Haley's position, you know, there was a desire on my part or by the part of like our network to have wide participation across, you know, different tribes. And I kept on just running into walls and it took a long time for our tribal partners to help me understand about tribal sovereignty and who was removed from which parts of Oregon, how that was represented in treaties or not, and what that means for modern day tribal sovereignty, right? And so asking a tribe whose members are not descended from this area to participate in any kind of decision making about resources in this area was not something that they wanted to see happen. Yeah, and I think the other element of only focusing on tribal governments as a way to do tribal engagement was one of our areas where when we were able to start building more relationships, we realized like, yes, that's valid and necessary and absolutely has to happen. But local native people, you know, like Haley was saying, they're not members of those tribes. They're not maybe even members of a federally recognized tribe, but they still want to be involved. They still want to, you know, have opportunities to do land tending and join being community on the land. So creating those two pathways or those different pathways for engagement that weren't solely working with tribal governments, but also extremely busy people, right? It's really a big I guess an omission from the beginning that I was so glad I was able to learn about and then tend to.
Thank you, appreciate it.